I was incarcerated at Rikers Island from May 7th, 2022 until late April 2023. We were called the Weekend Warriors, and just to let you know how rare a weekend warrior was, approximately last year there was 7 inmates that served weekends, and during my duration, by all accounts, there was probably around 5 to 6 people. It is extremely rare. There's approximately an average inmate population at Rikers right now of 5,500 inmates at any given time. So when I was there, let's say there was 5,000 inmates, I was one of 5 people that was able to do the weekends. I checked in at 9 a.m. every Saturday. I supposed to leave every Sunday at 5 p.m. Sometimes that happened, sometimes that didn't. So that's around 5 people out of 5,000 people. Approximately. That's how rare a weekend sentence is at Rikers Island for one of the most notorious jails in the country. I have a lot of crazy stories to tell you guys. Those 52 weekends, even though it was only for 2 days, 36 hours approximately, I saw a lot of different crazy things. I had my own unique stories, bringing in my own food, bringing in my own medication, no contraband, and just being isolated because I was never put in Gen Pop. Where I was housed at was not protective custody for me, protective custody for others, but it is essentially solitary in a way. I never got to leave my cell unless it was for medical. So I would stay in my cell for 36 hours. So May 7th, 2022, I report to Rikers Island for the first time to do my weekend sentencing. There's a visitor's lot right over the bridge that you can park at. And then there's a bus stop. The only way to get over to Rikers Island is you have to take the bus. Unless you're an employee, then you have to go through a checkpoint. I'm waiting for the bus my first day. I park my car. I take the bus. So you go over the bridge. You see LaGuardia to your right, looking at the East River. And you head to the island. And then the bus goes through the cul-de-sac. And then it drops you off right in front of the visitor center. My first time, I had no idea what to expect. My lawyer didn't tell me what to expect. He didn't have any idea. I tried to do some research online. There's not much information about weekends. Nonetheless, there's zero information about weekends at Rikers Island. And I go up to the front desk. Now, the visitor center is this eerie place. It's got drop tile ceiling that hasn't been replaced probably since the 70s. The floors are nasty. The bathroom smells. You got a TV on in the corner playing, the local news channel at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. You have a desk, and then right next to the desk, you have another CO who's just sitting there. So I go up to the CO at the desk. I say, I'm here to report for the weekends for the first time. He's like, okay, what's your name? They log you into the book. He calls dispatch. Dispatch didn't know where to put me at the time. So he says, take a seat. You're sitting there, you're staring at the vending machines, you're listening to the TV in the background. I'm getting anxious because I'm reporting for the first time and I don't know where I'm going to be housed. I don't know. I'm thinking, am I going to get out on time? I'm supposed to leave on Sunday at 5 p.m. Who comes to get me? Do I have to let them know? Are they going to forget about me? All these things are running through my head. So I'm waiting there for a while, probably about an hour for the first time. Dispatch gets called. They tell me that I'm going to go to West Facility. So they call my name to the desk. I go through the CO who's sitting down in the chair next to the front desk. That's your security checkpoint, your first security checkpoint at the visitor center. That's where visitors go through to visit family. That's where all the COs have to go through. There's a scanner, there's a metal detector, and that leads you out a back door where the transportation buses are at. So you either have transportation buses at Rikers Island or you have transport vans. No COs are allowed to walk around the island. No visitors allowed to walk around the island. The island, if you've never been, which I hope you've never been if you're watching, is massive. Rikers Island is massive. I believe there's 10 facilities on the island. I'm not sure how many square miles it is, but it's huge. So the facility that I end up going to, it's approximately a 5-minute ride from the visitor center to the facility. And the very first time that I checked in, and the majority of my stay, I stayed at what was called West Facility. And West Facility was called the Hotel of Rikers Island because you have different pods. It's not a housing unit where you have multiple floors. There's no Gen Pop, separate pods for the housing. And then in each pod, there's individual cells where you're completely locked off. Nobody's able to interact with each other face to face. There's an outdoor yard for people that are housed in West Facility that aren't weekenders. And West Facility is generally for people that are the troublemakers where they don't know where to put them, people that are under PC, protective custody, or people such as myself that were weekenders. And when you first get there, before you go into West Facility for the first time, my experience was I got brought to a trailer, which was the intake for West Facility. I walk in, it's this brightly lit small trailer with a couple different holding cells in it, small holding cells. They give me a bag where I have to change out of my street clothes, turn my phone off, put my phone in there. I'll put all my possessions in this bag. And then they give you your standard issue Rikers uniform, which is, for me, was khaki. It was May, so they gave me like a short sleeve cutoff. And they gave me khaki pants. And then they give you your blanket. Pillows and blankets were rare to come by. So I'm in intake, and then once you're in intake, they'll either drive you over in the bus or the van over to the housing units, even though it's just a short walk. And so you get to the housing units, the pods, they look like these white bubbles from the outside. And then you wait, and then they have to buzz you in. The CO gives the other CO a card under the glass. They make sure nobody's out walking about in the housing. Only one individual at a time can be out in the pods in West Facility. And then so once you're good to go, every weekend they would bring me into a different pod. So it was based upon availability. Since I would only go in there on Saturday and leave Sunday, as soon as I would leave, they would put somebody else in there. And they knew I was coming every weekend, so they would make sure to have availability for me at all times in that specific housing unit. And so my first time in there, it's these bright, warm yellow lights. You can see other individual cells, and sometimes people will be at the door, but you can't really see their faces because if they have all the lights turned off, it's extremely dark. Or sometimes people have newspaper clippings up all the way across their windows, so you can't see into them. They bring you into your individual cell immediately. And the reason why they call it the hotel is because these are pretty big cells. You have your own shower, of course, your own toilet. You have your own TV. Sometimes you'll have a little window. You don't get to look at anything, but you have a little natural light coming in. And then it's these big doors. So I believe West Facility, when it was originally created a long time ago, was for quarantining people that had diseases, because these doors are these airtight doors. They're massive and they're super heavy. And then when you first walk in, the CO opens the door. You walk into a little small corridor, and you look to your left or your right, and then they have a shelving unit where you can put stuff, and then that's where they drop off your food every day. And then there's another door, but usually that door is open. They have the capability to close both doors, but the other door that's open is where your cell is. So like I said, you have a shower, TV, toilet, and then you have it's not a cot, but it's a drilled into the floor steel bed with your mattress. And then sometimes, because it was a medical facility, sometimes you would actually get a medical bed that you would see in a hospital. And those were interesting because those were definitely more comfortable. Sometimes you would get lucky where you would have 2 stack mattresses. That made it a lot better for sleeping. Sometimes you were shit out of luck and you would get a mattress that was basically deflated, so it felt like you were laying on straight metal. That sucked, but that was the experience. You're in jail. And then so I would bring a lot of books. I would try to read as much as possible, but when I wouldn't read, I would try to watch TV. When I first got there, they had these old cube TVs with the buttons where you could go up to it and you could press the buttons. And they had the TV behind a plexiglass so that nobody could break in, smash the TV, or rip the wiring out of the TV, or do any nefarious things. So you were able to push through the plexiglass. The buttons were exposed. But they were small from where you were sleeping. The TV was small, so it was hard to see. And then my first weekend, I remember, like I said, I just had things anxiety. Are they going to come to get me the next day? So Sunday comes around, they drop off your food. They drop off your breakfast around 6 a.m. There's no clocks in the rooms either. So the only way you're ever able to tell what time it is if you can find a TV station that has the time on it. So you don't know what time it is. Or sometimes if you got placed in front of the CO's desk, and they would have a clock, but otherwise the guards come around every 30 minutes. That's how you would know when 30 minutes would go by, is because the guards have to do their rounds around the housing facility. And so they drop off your food around 6 a.m. for breakfast. Your lunch comes around 12 to 1. And then I would only be served dinner on Saturdays, unless I didn't get out on time on Sundays. Your dinner was served around 5. So I got in late for breakfast on Saturdays. So I would get lunch on Saturdays, dinner, and then on Sundays I would get breakfast, lunch, and then sometimes dinner if I wasn't released on time. And my first time I was released, I believe, right around on time. And the discharge process is a CO has to come and get you. They take you back to the intake area. Sometimes a captain would get you. They take you back to the intake area where you originally put your clothes in, change from your street clothes. They give you your bag back. You change back into your clothes. I would turn my phone back on. And then you're not allowed to leave until the captain comes and signs off on your paperwork. They take your fingerprints and they make you sign every single weekend. They do that. You take your fingerprints each time. You have to sign on the paperwork, and that's how they document that you were, there for their records. And then once the captain signs off on your paperwork, you're discharged officially. They have to call transportation. They would send a van, and these vans, I'm 6'3", 6'4". These vans are your normal transport vans, but in the back, they retrofitted them for like, you would put a dog back there. That's how small it is. It's super claustrophobic. And then they don't ever put you in cuffs. I was put in cuffs a few times, but that wasn't customary because usually those guys wouldn't know that they thought it was procedure, but I was never put in cuffs pretty much anywhere when I was serving the weekends. But they put you back into this van. They bring you back it's a 5-minute drive back to the visitor center again. Before you go into the visitor center, they bring you through a discharge trailer. There's a CO standing at the front. People don't get really discharged on the weekends. So you go up to the trailer, there's a guy there, and then they have to verify your identity. So they'll ask you your name, your social security number, or your address. And then sometimes they ask you as an inmate, you have a inmate number, specific inmate number. So they would ask you that sometimes too. And then they let you into the trailer. I didn't need a bus pass because the bus is free going over the bus isn't supposed to be free, but I would never take a bus pass and I would never pay for the bus because I was only going one stop over to the visitor center. No, going over to the visitors parking lot where my car was parked. So it's one stop from Rikers to the parking lot. And then you get to the visitor center when you're fully discharged, but now you have to wait for the bus. The bus schedule runs on Sundays. It's all over the place. You might catch the bus right away. You might have to wait an hour for the bus. So if I would get released at 5 p.m. By the time I would get to the visitor center, it was around 5:30, sometimes 6 o'clock, sometimes a little bit earlier. And then you have to wait for the bus. I would get on the bus and then it would take me over. I would be the first stop, get out, get in my car, and then drive home. And the first weekend that I was released, my uncle and my aunt were in town visiting and we went to Mr. Chow. So they knew that I was serving the weekends, like very few people that did, amongst my family and friends. And then we were sitting there eating Mr. Chow in the city. And I was thinking about like, damn, 5 hours ago, I was just eating this dog shit chicken and rice, this dry ass chicken and rice that tastes like nothing. And then now I'm having this great meal at Mr. Chow, which I was super thankful for. So that was my first weekend process. And then the weekends after that were definitely super hit or miss in terms of just crazy shit happening, or once in a while I'd have a weekend that was pretty chill, but so weekends were super hit or miss. By hit or miss, I mean, were they easy weekends at Rikers Island? What's easy? But there was definitely easier weekends than some weekends that were just like definitely tested your mental, even though you're only in there for 36 hours. I was only in there for 36 hours. I tried to learn ways to make it easier for myself, and such ways where I remember one of the times I went in and one of the COs sitting besides the desk at the visitor center was like, "Oh, did you bring snacks?" I thought he was fucking with me. I'm like, "What do you mean, did I bring snacks?" He's like, "Oh, bring some snacks next time." I'm like, "I didn't know you could do that." He's like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Well, I mean, every CO treats you differently, everything. You have some cool COs, you have some hard ass COs. And so the next time I was like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I try to bring in some snacks, they just confiscate them. So I started bringing in a small amount of food with me. I'd bring it in a little bag. And then when I would go through check-in at the visitor center, they would never say anything. And then when you go to the housing unit, before that, when you go to intake and you change into your clothes and you put your street clothes away and they give you that bag, and then you get your jail clothes. Well, I would have a bag full of food and they would go through my stuff. They would go through my books, make sure I'm not bringing any contraband and whatnot. And I started bringing in more and more stuff to see what I could bring in, what I couldn't bring in. Another thing that, starts to get really annoying is that when you're in those cells in West Facility, like I said, you can't just go and get water. You have a sink, but that water comes out like sediment. It's like milky. It's disgusting. You don't even want to brush your teeth with it. I would never take a shower in there. I never once took a shower in there. I'd always wait till I got home, because I've read stories in Rikers of people, their skin, you develop rashes. That water is fed through lead pipes. It's just not water you want to drink. You don't want to brush your teeth with it. You don't want it to have any contact on your skin. So, you would have to ask a CO for water, because when they would do their rounds every 30 minutes, they would have a big jug of water, but it was on the outside of everybody's cell. So if you want water, you have to tap on the window, hope that they notice you. And then sometimes they get you water. Sometimes they just turn around and they walk away, depending on the CO. And I'm like, how can I do this where I don't have to ask them for anything? I don't have to ask them for water. The only thing you might have to ask them for is sometimes your lights in your cell. There was lights in our cell where you could turn them off manually, but sometimes it didn't work. So you'd have to ask them to turn it off for you. And then so the water situation, I started bringing in my own water. I would bring in 2 1-liter bottles every single weekend, because I knew that amount of water would last me for the weekend without having to ask the COs. The only time I'd actually ask them for water was I asked them for hot water, and they had access to hot water. Or when I bring in snacks, I'd bring in ramen noodles, and then I would use the hot water to make the instant noodles. And the reason why I would bring in food is because I didn't have access to commissary. Commissary, I believe, was on a Thursday. So everybody else that was in West Facility that wasn't a weekend person had access to certain things I didn't have access to because they were in there all the time. I didn't have commissary. And I'm not complaining about that. I understand because I'm only there for 36 hours. But I also didn't want to eat the jail food. And most people don't want to eat the jail food. That's why they get commissary. So I started bringing in my snacks. I brought in water, and they didn't say anything to me. They would go through my possessions each time, but they never said anything. And so that worked out really well. And then other things about the weekends that just got crazy were that sometimes you'd be in a weekend pod where someone was just acting crazy. You know, you can hear them banging on the door, even if you're on the other side of the pod. The pods weren't really big. I think they only had about 10 to 12 cells in each pod. But if someone was banging all night at 2, 3 in the morning, the COs did nothing to stop it, nor could they do anything to stop it because, you know, they're not in Gen Pop. They're behind a cell, and people are just banging on the windows, screaming. People are banging on the doors. Generally, they put the misfits in West Facility, or they would put people in protective custody. Sometimes you would get lucky and the pod would be quiet that weekend, but other times you have people just banging constantly, and they're banging to the point where like you think they're going to break their hand. They're definitely not breaking the windows, but they're definitely going to break their hand slamming on that door nonstop. And depending on the CO, you know, sometimes they would interact with them and try to get them to stop, but usually that didn't work. Or sometimes the COs just ignore them and it makes it even worse. So sometimes you can get a decent sleep. Sometimes you get terrible sleep because you have a shitty mattress. You have people banging, screaming. You have people that are yelling against each other, talking hella shit about how they're going to fuck each other up, which is funny because those people do have yard time, but they put you in a cage, so you're not able to just walk freely in the yard. Sometimes when I come in on Saturday mornings, I would see them out in the cages, and you're secure from everyone. Like I said, nobody has interaction face to face with anyone. So these people are talking hella shit to each other, talking about beat each other's ass, I'm gonna kill you, whatever you can think of, they're saying it. And they don't even have face-to-face interaction with each other. So there's nothing that they could possibly do. There's not at any point in time where they're ever going to see each other in West Facility specifically. So that's just Rikers Island. That's just typical stuff. People are extremely violent. You're in solitary. Those people are in solitary, except for their little yard time. I was in solitary for 36 hours each weekend, and I was going crazy. Every time I would get released, it would take me, you know, a day to get readjusted because I would stay up as late as I possibly could on Friday night so that by the time I checked in Saturday morning when I got there, I would try to sleep as much as I could throughout the day. And then I would wake up in the evening for around dinner time. And then I would try to stay up as late as I could. I would try to sleep as long as I could until Sunday so that I would hopefully wake up around the afternoon, and then I would only have, you know, 4 or 5 hours before I got released. And that's what I would do. But during the, you know, trying to readjust to my life outside of Rikers when I wasn't in there for the weekends, that really messed with me because my sleep schedule was all messed up. I had no social interaction for 36 hours, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but when you don't talk to anybody for 36 hours, it makes it, you don't want to talk to anybody. Like I would shut down for a while. So Monday into Tuesday was always like a bit of a drag. And then I would, you know, be fine for the rest of the week until Friday. And then I would be a little down because I'm like, all right, I gotta, you know, report for the weekends again tomorrow. I started going out on Friday night, staying out late until 2, 3, 4 in the morning, getting 2 hours of sleep. And, you know, that's definitely not good combined with all the junk food that I was eating, all the snacks I was bringing in. I would bring in Oreos, Pringles, instant noodles, just literally the worst shit that you could eat. The jail food was actually honestly probably better for you because at least it's bare bones. It doesn't taste good, but at least there's some nutrients in there between chicken and rice and some vegetables. But no, there's no nutrients in what I was eating. So that probably didn't help with my mental either. And then just poor sleep habits while I was in there. You feel dirty. And then what also happened was at the beginning, they would tell me to turn in my blanket when I would be discharged, and they would tell me to turn in my pillow. And then so I would do that. But then there was a couple of times going through the first few months where when I would go in to check in on Saturday, they wouldn't have any pillows available for me. They wouldn't even have blankets sometimes. I ended up getting a jacket eventually, and I kept that jacket for the entirety of the weekends because sometimes I would just sleep in a jacket. And then in the summertime, it would be hot in there. So, you know, you didn't really need a blanket. But in the wintertime, you definitely needed the blanket and the jacket. So what I started to do was after several months going into the winter, I would just keep my blanket every weekend. I wouldn't turn it over because I got screwed. I would ask for blankets and they're like, we don't have any. I mean, this is Rikers Island. There's 5,000 plus inmates. How do you not have any blankets? Like, the city has so much money, and they intentionally, you can't tell me they're not intentionally doing things like this, underfunding, because who knows where this money's going, but just problems in the prison system. I'm not going to say that other people didn't have it substantially worse than I did, being in there every day for, pretrial or for whatever reason they're in there. But how do you not have blankets? How do you not have pillows? Like, that's just basic. It's crazy. And eventually I did West Facility for several months. And then sometime in the summer, they moved me. One day I show up to check in, and they moved me to a new facility, and it's called NIC, North Infirmary Command. And NIC, I was put on the 3rd level. And NIC now is not pods. It's a building with multiple floors. So one day I check into Rikers, and unsuspectingly, they bring me to a new facility. I was getting used to West Facility, and they bring me to a facility called NIC, which stands for North Infirmary Command. And it's a medical facility. It's where they bring inmates who have, they're stabbed, anything that happens to them, they need medical attention. So you have doctors that are in there and whatnot. But they bring me to a special floor on the 3rd floor. And NIC is completely different because it's not pods. It's a building. So there's multiple floors. And like I said, I'm on the 3rd floor. And it's just one row of cells going all the way down. So they put me at the very, very end. So in NIC, I would get the same cell each time, as opposed to West Facility, I would get a different cell and a different pod. And in NIC, I was at the very end, so I looked to my right, and you just see a row of cells all the way down. There's probably about 10 cells in there, and they're open, so you can hear everybody. And then in each cell, you have your toilet, and then you have a TV in your cell. And these are much more like your traditional jail cells, where they're really small compared to the ones in West Facility, which were substantially larger. There was one weekend person that was there when I first got to NIC, but he was almost finished. So there's only one other weekend person at that time. And then another weekend guy ended up joining me a few weeks into me being at NIC. We would get released at the same time on Sunday at 5 p.m. He would go in on Friday night. I would go in Saturday morning, but we would get out at the same time on Sunday. I remember his first weekend, and at that point I had been in NIC for a few weeks. So he's thinking like, I know what the routine is, how the guards act. And the guards do the same thing over there. They have to do rounds every 30 minutes. It was a little easier to get like your water and whatnot, but they would let me bring in water. They let me bring in snacks to NIC as well. NIC, for the first time, they bring me through, the intake is in NIC, in the actual building. And it was weird because, now I have to like restart. It's like getting to know all these people. I was getting to know the COs at West Facility. They knew who I was. They knew what time I came in. I recognized most of their faces. You have the standoffish ones, but most of them were cool with me. And then in NIC, I was seeing a whole new group of COs. They know on weekends, but at first they don't know who you are. They got to do procedural shit. So they would always put my stuff through the X-ray, even though I would get my stuff put through the scanner in the visitor center. They made me do like a super traditional intake at first, where they do like a strip search and whatnot. They only did that one time because I had never done that at West Facility, and I was never doing strip searches every week. It's a completely different thing. Like I said, no handcuffs. I got put in handcuffs probably twice out of all the 52 weekends. I would start to get an attitude. I remember one time towards the end, a guy put me in handcuffs. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, this is what we're supposed to do. I would start to tell them what they do and what they don't do. I'm like, you don't put me in handcuffs. I've been doing this for almost a year now. You don't put me in handcuffs. And they're like, oh, well, I was told I have to. So I'm like, all right, whatever. It's a 5-minute ride. They take you out of your handcuffs. But NIC was different at first. It was more strict, but then they lightened up, and I was able to bring in snacks, the water. NIC was different too because the cells were open. So if people were talking and whatnot, you could hear every single thing they were saying. NIC, I had to get used to different things. And one of the things that I did at West Facility was I was actually able to sneak in a remote because I had no access to the remotes while I was there. Sometimes you would go into a cell in your pod at West Facility, and they switched the TVs over to flat screen TVs, but you needed a remote, where the old TVs, like I said, were the push button ones. And if you did get a remote in there, it wouldn't have batteries because somebody would take the batteries out. So you would have to ask the CO to ask another inmate to let you borrow their remote. And it always felt awkward doing because a lot of inmates, I don't want to ask the COs for anything. And a lot of inmates don't want to do that because they don't trust that they're going to get the remote back. And then the only way to get a remote was through security. And security, they're completely different, but they don't work on the weekends. And of course, they don't work on the weekends. Why would they work? Nothing works on the weekends, apparently, at Rikers. It's like everybody has time off on the weekends, even though it's a 24/7 jail. Doesn't make any sense. So eventually I was able to sneak in a universal remote. I would put it in my bag when I would leave. I had a jacket, and I put it in the coat pocket of the jacket so that I always had it there. I could change the channel, turn the TV on, change the volume at West Facility. And then the problem is when I went to NIC, my bag didn't come with me that I had at West Facility. So I had the remote in the bag over there. And then when I get to NIC, I didn't have a remote. So I had to get a remote. But also, since the cells were open, they didn't have volumes where you could hear, because you would hear everybody with the TV on. So you had to get a special radio that security would give you that you had to get through commissary. Actually, you had to get the batteries through security, and then you would get the radio through commissary, and that way you'd have headphones on and you could tune in to the frequency of that specific TV that was in your cell, and that way you could hear it. So the first few weeks, I didn't have a radio, so the TV would be on, but I can't hear it. I spent a lot of time reading then. I was reading a lot of books, boring shit that people don't care about that I've always been interested in. I was reading all these books on socioeconomic issues, economics, finance, things like that I'm interested in. So I read a lot of books while I was in there. And then finally I was like, fuck this, I'm going to get a radio. So I bought a radio. I was able to bring it in. I was able to get it hooked up. I brought a remote in too. I was able to get that in. I remember the guy saw it. I'm like, yo, I can't get a remote and a radio, so why not just let me bring it in? He let me bring it in. I was able to tune it to the specific TV in my cell. I was able to watch TV. I was able to hear it finally. And then so my time at NIC after I got accustomed to everything was pretty chill. Nobody else spent time in that cell, which was nice because I could leave stuff in that cell. When I would come back, it was still there. But I only did that for a few months, and I don't even know why they brought us over to NIC in the first place. And then eventually one day in the summer, again, towards the end, I'm done with NIC because I go to check in and they bring me back to West Facility. And I have to go through the same process again. I had the remote. It didn't get brought over from NIC, so I had to get another remote and things like that. And then I had to make sure my blanket, I had to get the blanket again to make sure that I always had a blanket and stuff like that, because there's nothing worse than showing up and thinking, like, I have these customs down. I know I have my blanket at least. I know I have my pillow. And then you show up and they're like, we don't have a pillow. We don't have a blanket. It's a shitty situation for anybody, you know? The craziest thing that happened to me that summer, I was really pissed. This is so fucked up. Sometimes they would make me go to the medical team, and they would always think that I was a new admittant from somewhere else on the island. But I would tell them, I'm just here till tomorrow. And even they didn't know. Like, what do you mean? These nurses, they take your blood pressure, you know, stuff like that, basic intake stuff. One time, the CO opened the door at West Facility. I told you there are these big airtight doors, and they're super, super heavy. And I kind of grab onto the door as I'm leaving. And then somehow I wasn't paying attention, and my ring finger got stuck in between the door when it closed and the door frame. And I just remember, like, if you're not watching on YouTube right now, you don't see my face. I just remember my eyes just bulging out of my face, and I felt the door hit my finger. I immediately grabbed my finger, and I was scared to look at, because I thought my finger was gone. I thought from the knuckle up was legitimately chopped off. It felt like that. And I was scared to look at it. So I was just holding it. And then I walked into medical, thankfully, at that time. And I looked down at my finger, and it was gushing blood. And I started feeling like really woozy. And I told them, I'm like, look, I just slammed my finger in that door. And then they wrapped it up for me, and all they were able to give me was like some Advil. So then I go back into the cell after the medical examination, and I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, my finger's pulsing. I can feel it pulsing, the heartbeat through my finger. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. I'm hitting here on the weekends. I don't even have bodily injuries like this in my lifetime. So this happens here, and I'm sitting there like, this is bullshit. And then so I remember spending the whole, the rest, that was on Saturday. So I spent the whole rest of the time in there. That happened early Saturday too. So my finger was just pulsing the entire time. I thought for sure I broke my finger when I was discharged. When I was home, I went to urgent care, and then, this is how I would always have interactions with people, telling them about the weekends. The doctor came in, they took an x-ray of my finger. Thankfully they didn't have to pop underneath the nail because the nail cracked. So that's why all the blood came out. So they didn't have to prick it so that the pressure was released. I didn't end up breaking my finger, but the finger was definitely messed up for a while. And I remember the doctor at the urgent care was like, how did this happen? I was like, oh, well, I was at Rikers Island. I was serving my weekend sentence, and my finger got jammed in the door. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, yeah, I serve weekends at Rikers Island. I have to go in there every Saturday. I leave every Sunday. People don't know this is a thing. They're still taken aback, to this day when I tell them that. She's like, that's a thing? I'm like, yeah, as a part of my sentence, I have to do that. So she's like, oh, wow. Like, I didn't know that, that they did that. And I was like, yeah, trust me, nobody knows pretty much that they do that, especially at Rikers. So that was such a shitty experience, though. That, in terms of physical pain or whatever, I'm protected. I'm isolated. I'm not around anybody that's going to stab me or anything like that. But somehow I get my fucking finger jammed in the door, and that shit hurts so bad. I'm telling you, those doors are insane. I can't believe that my finger literally didn't get cut off, because that's exactly what it felt like. I want to make this a 2-part episode because I wanted to give everyone the introduction of the weekends and the process of coming in and coming out. The next episode, part 2, I want to go into more stories, because that was just the summertime. The first few months, I'm like, damn, this is going to be a long 52 weekends based upon everything that was happening. Rikers is so unpredictable. I spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at Rikers that year, because it was on a Saturday and a Sunday. I spent New Year's Eve and New Year's Day in Rikers. I was in there for part of Easter. I was in there during my birthday weekend. I want to go into other crazy stories I have. And yeah, I'm just going to leave you guys on the cliffhanger for this one. So stay tuned for part 2. Thank you.